Do you try to control how God works in your life? The stories of the Israelites in the wilderness, Naaman, and Gideon all share a common theme and a lesson for that question. It is our tendency as humans to want to control the outcome of our situations, even when we are seeking God's help. Just as the Israelites grumbled and doubted God's provision, Naaman initially resisted God's instructions for his healing, and Gideon struggled to trust God's plan for victory. We too often try to dictate how God should work in our lives. We often want to control the way God works in our lives. We want to dictate how our prayers are answered, how our problems are solved, and how our lives unfold. We want to be in control, and we don't like it when things don't go our way. This is a natural human tendency. We want to be in control of our own lives, and we don't like it when things are out of our hands. But God is not our servant. He is our sovereign Lord, and He has the right to do things His way. When we try to control the way God works in our lives, we are essentially saying that we know better than God. We are saying that we know what is best for us and that God doesn't. Let's take Naaman as an example. Naaman was a prominent figure in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament book of 2 Kings. He was a commander in the army of the king of Syria and was highly regarded for his military prowess and success in battle. According to the story in 2 Kings 5, Naaman suffered from leprosy, which was a highly stigmatized and incurable disease at the time. He learned from a servant girl captured from Israel that there was a prophet in Samaria who could heal him. Naaman sought out the prophet Elisha, who instructed him to wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman was initially resistant, but eventually followed Elisha's instructions and was miraculously healed of his leprosy. Naaman's story is often interpreted as a demonstration of the power of faith and the willingness to submit to a higher authority. It is also sometimes used as an example of God's willingness to heal even those who are considered outsiders or enemies of Israel. He was a commander in the army of the king of Aram, which was a neighboring country to Israel. In the Bible, Naaman is described as a Gentile, which refers to a non-Jewish person. However, despite being a Gentile, Naaman recognized the power of the God of Israel and was willing to seek out Elisha for healing. According to the biblical account in 2 Kings 5, Naaman was reluctant to follow Elisha's instructions to wash 7 times in the Jordan River because he felt that the process was too simple and beneath him. Naaman was a powerful and influential military commander, and he expected Elisha to perform some elaborate ritual or ceremony to cure him of his leprosy. When Elisha merely instructed him to wash in the Jordan River, Naaman felt insulted and thought that Elisha was treating him with contempt. However, Naaman's servants convinced him to follow Elisha's instructions, telling him that if Elisha had asked him to do something difficult, he would have done it. So why not try the simple task of washing in the river? Naaman eventually followed their advice, and when he washed 7 times in the Jordan, his leprosy was miraculously healed. This event demonstrated the power of faith and the importance of humility and obedience, even when things don't seem to make sense or fit our expectations. In the book of Exodus, when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness and were bitten by poisonous snakes, God instructed Moses to make a bronze snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who looked at the bronze snake would be healed. However, some of the Israelites doubted this method of healing and refused to look at the bronze snake, and as a result, they died. Now let's jump over to Gideon's story on Judges 6:7. When the angel of the Lord first appeared to Gideon, he expressed doubt about his ability to lead the Israelites to victory against the Midianites. He questioned how God could be with them when they were suffering under the oppression of the Midianites. Even after God gave Gideon a sign of his favor by causing a fire to consume a sacrifice that Gideon had prepared, Gideon continued to doubt. When God instructed Gideon to tear down the altar of the false god Baal in his hometown, Gideon was afraid to do so openly and did it at night. When God later told Gideon that he had too many men in his army and instructed him to reduce the size of his forces, Gideon was still unsure of God's plan. God then instructed Gideon to observe the way in which his remaining soldiers drank water from a stream. Gideon was told to select only the men who drank by lapping the water like a dog, while those who put their faces in the water were to be sent home. In the end, Gideon followed God's instructions and reduced his army to a group of just 300 men. After this, God knew Gideon was still afraid, so he told him, "If you are afraid, then go down and listen to what the enemy is saying," which is exactly what Gideon did, as he was still afraid of accepting God's plan. None of the plans God made for Gideon made sense to him, and he doubted just like Naaman did. Naaman wanted an elaborate ceremony of some sort like he was used to, and Gideon sounded like he wanted to build a massive army, which generally makes sense. As Gideon was still afraid, he went down to the Midianite camp. One night, Gideon overheard a man from the Midianite army telling his friend about a dream he had had. In the dream, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the Midianite camp and struck the tent, causing it to collapse. The friend interpreted the dream to mean that God had given the Midianites and their camp into Gideon's hands. Gideon was encouraged by this dream, and he went out to battle the Midianites as the Lord had directed him. He divided his army into 3 companies, and he gave each company a trumpet, a clay jar with a torch inside, and a sword. He instructed his men to blow their trumpets, break their jars, and shout as they ran into the Midianite camp. When the Midianites heard the noise, they thought they were being attacked by a large army. They panicked and fled, and Gideon and his men pursued them and defeated them. The Israelites were victorious, and they were delivered from the oppression of the Midianites. The lesson here is God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. He knows what is best for us and has a plan that may not always make sense to us in the moment. Just as the Israelites eventually learned to trust God's provision, Naaman was healed only when he humbly followed God's instructions. And Gideon's victory came through obeying God's unconventional battle plan. We too must learn to trust God and follow his lead, even when it goes against our own expectations and desires.